The medical establishment has spent decades telling people that getting older simply means slowing down, expecting less from your body, and accepting fatigue as the price of admission. The newest research on healthy aging completely contradicts that. If you're past 75 and you still wake up with real energy, still want to get up and do things, still feel like yourself most days, that is not luck. And it is not some genetic accident you can take no credit for. It means several very specific, very measurable systems inside your body are still working the way they're supposed to, and scientists now know exactly which ones. And just as importantly, if your energy has dipped over the last few years, and you've been quietly assuming that's simply what happens after 75, what you're about to hear should change how you think about that too. Every single marker on this list has been shown in real studies to respond to fairly ordinary changes, not because aging stops, but because the specific systems driving fatigue turn out to be far more adjustable than the old just slow down advice ever gave them credit for. I'm not a doctor, and nothing in this video is medical advice. I'm here to explain the why behind what researchers have found, not to diagnose anything about you personally. What I do is dig through the published research on healthy aging and translate it into plain language, because most of what's actually been discovered about why some people stay sharp and energetic into their 80s and 90s never makes it past a medical journal, sitting behind paywalls and dense statistical language that almost nobody outside academia ever reads. Today I'm walking you through the 5 things your body is doing right if you've still got real energy after 75. And stay with me to number 1 because it's a single number researchers now consider so reliable that some doctors check it before almost anything else on your chart. Before we get into the list, quickly, tell me in the comments how old you are and whether your energy feels the same as it did 10 years ago, better or worse. I read every one of these, and it shapes exactly what I dig into next. Here's what almost nobody explains clearly. Energy in later life was never really about one thing. It's not just exercise, or just diet, or just genetics. Researchers studying healthy aging now describe it as several separate systems that all have to be working reasonably well at the same time. Your muscles, your blood vessels, your immune system, your sleep, and even your social life. Because each one quietly drains or replenishes the same shared pool of physical energy your body has to draw from every single day. Think of it less like one battery and more like 5 separate generators, all feeding into the same power grid. If even 1 or 2 generators are running well, you can still feel pretty good. But the people who feel genuinely energetic into their 80s tend to have most or all 5 running at once. And the striking thing the research shows is that every single one of these 5 is, at least partly, something you still have real influence over, even after 75. This is a meaningfully different way of thinking about energy than most people grew up with. The old model was almost entirely about willpower and toughing it out. Either you had energy or you didn't, and if you didn't, you simply pushed through. The newer model coming out of geriatric research treats energy the way an engineer might treat a power grid, as the output of several measurable inputs, each one trackable, each one at least partly modifiable, and each one quietly influencing the others. That reframe matters because it turns, "Why don't I have the energy I used to?" from a vague, discouraging question into 5 specific, answerable ones, which is exactly the order we're about to go through them in. One more thing worth saying before we get into the list itself. None of these 5 markers requires expensive testing or a specialist referral to start paying attention to. Walking pace. You can notice for yourself just by being honest about whether your usual stride has slowed compared to a few years ago. Grip strength, a doctor can check in about 30 seconds at a routine visit. Sleep quality, you already have a sense of just by how you feel most mornings. Social connection, you can count on one hand. The inflammation markers are the one item that genuinely needs a blood test, but it's a standard one your doctor can order alongside routine labs you may already be getting. None of this is exotic. It's ordinary information that simply hasn't been framed until fairly recently as one connected picture. Let's go through them, starting with number 5. Number 5 is strong social connection, And I want you to pay close attention to this one because it's consistently underestimated compared to diet and exercise, even though the data on it is enormous. A landmark analysis pooling 148 separate studies found that people with strong social relationships had a 50% greater chance of survival over the study periods compared with those with poor social ties, a gap roughly comparable to the difference between smokers and non-smokers. Inside the body, the mechanism isn't mysterious. Chronic loneliness keeps stress hormones like cortisol elevated, and sustained high cortisol quietly drains the same energy reserves your muscles and immune system are trying to use for repair and recovery. Dr. Robert Waldinger, who directs Harvard's 85-year-long study of adult development, has put it about as plainly as a researcher ever does. People who are more socially connected to family, friends, and community are happier, healthier, and live longer. And loneliness, in his words, is about as damaging as smoking. Separate research tracking adults over time has found that people with deeper, longer-standing social ties show measurably slower cellular aging and lower chronic inflammation than their less connected peers, which means this isn't simply a mood effect, so it shows up in actual biological markers, the same kind doctors use to track aging itself. If you've still got people you talk to regularly, see in person, or genuinely look forward to spending time with, that is not a small thing sitting off to the side of your physical health. It is one of the 5 generators doing real measurable work, and the bridge to the next item is closer than it might seem. The same social and physical engagement that protects against loneliness turns out to be one of the most effective tools researchers have found for protecting a completely different system entirely, the one responsible for how well you actually sleep at night. Number 4 is protected deep sleep, specifically the deepest stage called slow wave sleep, which is when your body does most of its overnight physical repair. Sleep researchers have documented that slow wave sleep naturally declines with age, which is part of why "I just don't sleep like I used to" is such a common complaint, and why total sleep time, the number of nighttime awakenings, and the proportion of deep sleep all shift gradually starting well before 75. But here's the part that matters for energy specifically. A study of elderly residents found that adding a simple, structured routine of daily physical and social activity, nothing extreme, just consistent activity at set times of day, measurably increased the amount of slow-wave sleep participants got at night, and that increase came with real improvements in next-day mental sharpness. This matters because slow-wave sleep isn't just about feeling rested. Researchers describe it as the stage where the brain and body handle genuine maintenance work, clearing out cellular waste and consolidating the kind of repair that simply doesn't happen as efficiently during lighter stages of sleep. People who protect this stage, largely through consistent daily rhythms rather than any special supplement or trick, tend to wake up with noticeably more usable energy than people whose sleep has become fragmented and shallow. The bridge to the next item is direct. The same daily activity that protects your sleep is also one of the biggest levers for the next thing on this list, which has nothing to do with how much you sleep and everything to do with what's happening inside your bloodstream while you're awake. Number 3 is low chronic inflammation, what researchers specifically call inflammaging, the slow, low-grade inflammatory drift that tends to creep upward with age even without any obvious illness present. A large study of elderly Eastern Europeans, tracking thousands of participants over 65, measured 2 specific inflammatory markers in the blood, interleukin-6 and C-reactive protein, and found both were strong, independent predictors of physical performance, mental sharpness, and how long people lived, even among people who were aging successfully overall. Here's the mechanism in plain terms. Those inflammatory markers are signals your immune system sends out when it's working overtime, and an immune system running hot all the time competes for the same metabolic resources your muscles and brain need for everyday energy. Interestingly, researchers studying centenarians, people who've lived past 100 years, have found something nuanced here. It isn't that these markers are completely absent in the longest-lived people, but that the balance between inflammatory and anti-inflammatory signals tends to be better regulated, meaning their immune systems still respond appropriately to actual threats without staying chronically switched on in the background. People who keep those markers lower into their 70s and 80s through a combination of regular movement, adequate sleep, and not carrying excess weight around the midsection simply have more of that shared resource left over for feeling like themselves day to day. This is also exactly why items 4 and 5 on this list aren't separate from item 3. Poor sleep and chronic loneliness are two of the most well-documented drivers of exactly this kind of elevated inflammation, which is precisely why these 5 things move together rather than independently. And this naturally leads into the next item. Because of all the things that influence inflammation, one stands out for how directly and how quickly it can shift the numbers, the amount of muscle tissue your body is actively maintaining. Number 2 is preserved muscle strength. And this is where a genuinely encouraging piece of research deserves more attention than it gets. The old assumption was that muscle loss after 70 was basically a one-way street, and for a long time, even doctors treated it that way. It isn't a one-way street. A 12-week study of older adults with a mean age right around 70 found that a structured resistance training program combined with simple nutrition guidance didn't just slow muscle loss, it reversed it, dropping the rate of clinically diagnosed sarcopenia, the medical term for age-related muscle wasting, from just over 35% of participants down to 0. Grip strength went up from roughly 28 kilograms to just over 30. The time it took participants to rise from a chair 5 times in a row got meaningfully faster. Their up-and-go test, a simple measure of how quickly someone can stand, walk a short distance, turn, and sit back down, improved measurably in just 3 months. Separate research on this same topic has found that resistance training remains effective at building real strength and muscle size in women up to age 96, which tells you this isn't a narrow window that closes at some specific birthday. It's a system that keeps responding to the right kind of input for a remarkably long time. The point isn't that everyone over 75 needs to become a powerlifter. It's that the muscle loss doctors used to treat as an inevitable, permanent feature of aging turns out to be remarkably responsive to fairly modest, structured effort. And the energy people feel day to day tracks closely with how much of that muscle and strength they've managed to hold on to. It's worth being specific about what structured means here, because the research is fairly consistent on this point. The programs that produce these results generally involved resistance work 2 to 3 times a week, using either light weights, resistance bands, or bodyweight movements like rising from a chair, performed with enough effort that the last few repetitions genuinely felt challenging. It was not about lifting heavy or training for hours. It was about applying enough resistance, consistently enough for the muscle to have a reason to maintain itself rather than continue its default slow decline. And here's number 1. The one I asked you to wait for: your walking pace. Specifically, how fast you walk at your normal, everyday speed. Not rushing, just your usual pace down a hallway or across a parking lot. Researchers pooling data from over 34,000 older adults across 9 separate long-term studies found that every tenth of a meter per second increase in someone's normal walking speed was associated with a 12% lower risk of death over the following years. People walking at or above about 1 meter per second, roughly 3 feet per second, a brisk but completely ordinary pace, tracked with above average life expectancy for their age. People walking slower than about 0.6 meters per second showed up as a clear, higher risk group. What makes this number so powerful, according to the researchers, is that it isn't measuring one single thing. It's a real-time readout of your cardiovascular system, your muscles, your nervous system, and your balance all working together at once, which is exactly why it predicts outcomes about as well as a whole panel of clinical tests. And critically, this number is not fixed. Follow-up research has shown that walking speed responds to the same kinds of interventions we've already discussed. Resistance training, brisk walking programs, and simple balance work have improved gait speed by meaningful margins within just 8 to 12 weeks, even in adults over 80. And that improvement alone has been linked to a measurably lower mortality risk in the years that follow. If you can still walk at a steady, unhurried, genuinely brisk pace without having to think about it, that is your body quietly demonstrating that several major systems are still coordinating correctly, which is precisely why I asked you to stick around for this one specifically. Consider a woman in her late 70s. Call her Margaret, the kind of case this research describes again and again. Margaret never thought of herself as especially athletic. She wasn't lifting weights or running marathons, but she walked to see a neighbor most afternoons. She kept a regular bedtime, and she'd started a light twice-weekly strength routine a community center offered after her doctor mentioned her grip strength was a little weaker than it used to be. None of it felt dramatic. A year later, at a routine checkup, her doctor flagged that her walking speed, her grip strength, and even her blood work markers had all moved in the right direction at once, not because of one big change, but because those small, ordinary habits had quietly reinforced each other, the same way the 5 things on this list are designed to. What's worth noticing about Margaret's case is how little any single piece of it would have stood out on its own. A daily walk to a neighbor's house sounds almost too modest to mention. A twice-weekly strength class at a community center sounds equally unremarkable. Neither one by itself reads like the kind of dramatic lifestyle overhaul that tends to get attention. But the research we've just walked through explains exactly why the combination mattered more than any single piece. The walk supported her sleep and her cardiovascular system at once. The strength class supported her muscle mass and, by extension, her inflammatory markers. And the simple act of seeing her neighbor regularly fed directly into the social connection research we covered first. She wasn't doing 5 separate things, she was doing 2 or 3 ordinary things that happened to touch all 5 systems simultaneously. Here's the synthesis and why this list matters more as a whole than as 5 separate items. These 5 things reinforce each other in both directions, for better and for worse. Better sleep lowers inflammation. Lower inflammation supports muscle maintenance. Stronger muscles support a faster, steadier walking pace. A faster walking pace and more energy make it easier to stay socially active. And staying socially active protects sleep quality, which brings you right back to the start of the loop. That's the real reason doctors are moving away from treating these as 5 unrelated lifestyle tips and toward treating them as one interconnected system. Improving any single one tends to nudge the others in the same direction. The reverse is just as true and worth naming plainly. A decline in any one of these 5 tends to drag the others down with it. Someone who becomes more isolated often sleeps worse. Worse sleep often shows up as higher inflammation. Higher inflammation makes it harder to maintain muscle, even with the same effort. And reduced muscle mass is one of the most common reasons walking pace slows down in the first place. Recognizing that loop in either direction is useful because it means a single well-chosen change, joining one regular activity, committing to one weekly strength session, keeping one consistent bedtime, rarely stays isolated. It tends to ripple outward into the other 4 areas simply because the underlying biology of all 5 is so tightly connected. None of this means you need to overhaul your entire life starting tomorrow, and none of it means anything is wrong with you if 1 or 2 of these feel weaker right now than you'd like. The research is consistently clear that meaningful improvement in any of these 5 areas is possible well into your 70s, 80s, and beyond. This isn't a closing window. It's a system that keeps responding to input for as long as you keep giving it some. If today's appointment or your last checkup touched on any of these, a grip strength test, a walking speed measurement, a mention of inflammation markers in your blood work, bring this video up with your doctor and ask specifically where you stand on whichever one applies to you. That conversation, grounded in your actual numbers, is worth far more than guessing. To recap the 5 things your body is doing right if you've still got real energy after 75, staying genuinely connected to people, protecting deep, restorative sleep, keeping chronic inflammation low, holding on to muscle strength through some form of regular resistance work, and maintaining a steady, brisk walking pace that hasn't had to slow down. None of these 5 operates alone, and none of them requires turning your life upside down. They're connected systems, responding to the same handful of ordinary daily habits, and every one of them remains genuinely workable well past 75. Tell me in the comments which of these five feels strongest for you right now and which one you'd like to work on. I read every comment and it tells me exactly what to cover next. And if you found this one useful, there's a habit almost as important as any of these five quietly working against people after 60i, the simple morning habit that's secretly undoing your blood pressure medication. That's the one I'd watch next.